We've already heard this morning, so many of us across the nation and indeed across the world turned out yesterday for the No Kings rallies and marches. I know that many of us took part, either at 103rd and Western, downtown, or elsewhere. We have felt the recent assaults on democracy deeply, acutely, viscerally. So many bleak images. We witness as our neighbors are grabbed out of their homes and off the streets by teams of masked thugs. We see images of fully armed military personnel invading homes and workplaces of the poorest amongst us. And we fear increased tyranny as our president tries to cripple democratic process and seize total control, abetted by the Congress and the Supreme Court. I see and hear the suffering that many of you bear, the pain wrought by this cabal of greed and selfishness that now runs our country. I know you worry and are afraid of where things are headed, what might yet be in our future. And so, knowing that we all hold this collective pain, I want to ask a question. How did it feel to go outside yesterday? To stand up for your truth as you know it, and to be surrounded by so many people that were doing just the same. It was important. I was but one pawn in a crowd of over 200,000 people in Grant Park yesterday. I attended as a citizen, not as a minister, joined by my wife, Pat, and our neighbors. And we listened to the event organizers, to local activists, to Mayor Johnson, to Governor Pritzker. We chanted, we danced, we cheered, and it was all cathartic. The messages were all over the place, but they carried a few dominant themes. Trump and ICE are not welcome here in Chicago. We support the immigrant populations in our city, and we are still committed to America and to our Constitution. The federal leadership is trying to explain away these protests as something organized by America haters. But the opposite was evident. In my life, I've been to many demonstrations, and this was the first time I've been to an anti-government rally where the most common cheer was USA, USA. Blew me away. Yes, there was anger expressed, mostly as a steady stream of moral indignation. We decried violence, militarism, and the constant abuse of the least powerful amongst us, especially those who are black or brown. But the overall mood was upbeat, pleasant, and outright friendly. This was not just a peaceful protest, but a positive protest. Everyone smiled a lot, had a good time, and enjoyed a pretty nice October afternoon. I really think we have an in with the weather. Do you remember that January day when we all went out for the Women's March right after Trump's first inauguration, and it was like 70 degrees and sunny in January? I might rethink about our connections to the powers that be. It was possibly because we were all experiencing relief that comes from knowing we're not alone in this, that thousands of others were there for the reasons we were. It felt communal, and we all seemed to really need that shared feeling. Does this sound familiar? It should, because we've been doing that on a smaller scale right here in this church with this congregation. And here we do more than engender a communal feeling. Here we try to build community, a caring and supportive place where we can hold each other in whatever way is needed. Together, we try to find and build hope. Yesterday's rallies across the nation were huge, and we can hope they are bellwethers of a gradual turning, that the accumulation of everything we see as bad is beginning to move public opinion away from the present regime, and we need to keep it up, as has been said here today, in the public forum and in every personal engagement we experience. We don't always need to be brash and loud in protest, although that has its place, but we always, whatever we are, need to be decent, thoughtful, compassionate citizens. Using moral clarity and love is our superpower. We all face this same basic political situation. It's uncomfortable, unsettling, and downright scary at times. We would like to believe that there is movement towards moderation and democracy, but there's a real valid fear about the onset of the authoritarian state in a white supremacist, Christian-based social order. But let me get away from that. For some of us, the political world is but one source of angst that is overlaid on many others. We hear some of the concerns held here during our candles of community, and we hear of our congregants as they try to cope with many difficulties and threats in their lives. Job and income loss, loved ones facing the end of life, personal health issues, treatment difficulties, financial difficulty, fear of discrimination, maltreatment, depression, and so much more. These are all part of life. Things that happen, even when the nation and the economy are healthy. Life can be hard, challenging, and bring problems we just don't know how to face. And we know that bad things often do tend to cluster together and reinforce one another. So we really can end up in a situation where the wheels just fall off of our lives, seemingly leaving little way forward. And I'm sorry, but I cannot stand here and give pat advice for what to do when everything falls apart. And if anyone tries to tell you, they're a charlatan and a snake oil salesperson. Times of great distress, for whatever cause, are the times when you might benefit most from being surrounded by others, in congregation, in community, where you would benefit most from being held, being helped, and being reminded that you are worthy and you are loved. It's also sometimes the hardest times to seek that help. What I can advise with some greater confidence are some strategies to avoid situations where difficult things might pile up on you at once. And you can do this by learning to hold those things that threaten or harm you in perspective, to figure out what they really mean. I'm not unique in this, but my chosen vocation, being a minister, entails experiencing many difficulties. I work with my own problems, of course, with some of your problems, and with those issues that face our wider community. I'm expected to engage in grieving, to share in pain, and to maintain perspective as I do so. And I don't have clear answers to many of your problems, but I am willing and prepared to share them with you. I can listen, I can care, and on some rare occasions, I can contribute some useful help. But I do end up holding lots of baggage, mentally and emotionally. And what I can describe is how I have learned to sort of compartmentalize things in my mind in order to protect myself from letting them interact and compound into something overwhelming. Almost intuitively, I sort of categorize every issue I face. I try to figure out who the problem really belongs to. I try to discern the source or the cause of the problem, and I try to see how it might manifest, good or bad, how it will affect you or me. And the usefulness of this is illustrated by the very familiar serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. What we need to address most when things become hard is honestly figuring out where the problem comes from. And for many things, it's relatively easy. In the case of illness of ourselves or a loved one, we see the main problem is medical, and the primary need one of understanding treatment and prognosis. This is external to us and should be managed mostly in sort of an objective and rational fashion. That is the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. That's not to say there can't be more complicated issues attached to the illness that are more personal, but I'll sidestep those for now. The problem we are all holding about dealing with the fear of impending authoritarianism or fascism in our nation is also external to us as individuals. We can talk about how as a citizenry we allowed it to happen, but that's another narrative. It's bigger than any one of us and it was not caused and can't be solved solely by individual action. Again, in some ways, it involves asking for the serenity to accept what I cannot change. Objectively, we should be able to separate it from other things in our personal life. If we find that we are overwrought or consumed by what Trump is doing, then we need to consider our response as a personal or personality issue, and possibly something we can evaluate and maybe change. I mean, that's no real secret. How many of you have assumed sort of a posture of general depression because of this gloom that overhangs the nation? Don't let him do that to you. You're you still. If we are losing a job or a relationship is ending, or if we face some similar problem, then things are not so clear. Our first task is really to try to honestly decide if our personality or behavior helped bring this situation about. If your job was wiped out by funding cuts and organizational cutbacks, you might just be the victim of something external to you. But if you think your skill or performance or attitude might have contributed, you need to step up and acknowledge that fact to yourself, not to others. This is where friends and objective others can help. Some of us will always claim it was done to us, while some of us will always believe it must have been our fault. And often neither of those are really the whole truth. What becomes clear is that working to build knowledge of yourself, what you are, who you are, what you truly care about, how you find meaning and purpose, and where you anchor your ethical being, this is always important, as your personality is central to understanding how things happen to you and what you need to do to work towards a solution. Waiting until you're in crisis, it's really a poor time to engage in personal identity work. as too many things in your life are in flux at once. But for most of us, a crisis is the prompt we need to learn that we really do need to pay attention to our fundamental inner selves. This is too often the problem with issues like addiction. You often have to hit rock bottom before you can be motivated to accept that you have a problem and learn that you need to seek help to find change. One of the more important goals of our church life is to prompt and promote personal discernment, helping each member address issues that help them to learn who they are, what they care about deeply, and how they wish to engage with others and with the broader world. In our UU tradition, we typically assign responsibility to each person for their own efforts and actions, and for their search to understand how they interpret ultimacy. We might use religious terminology like, where do you find the sacred in life? But what we mean by this is what matters most to you and how you know this and hold it in the world. And for many of us, the answers to those questions, what is most important, lie in relationship and loving connection to other persons. If you know yourself, if you can name what you love, and if you understand where you base your sense of right and wrong, if you have all of these things lined up, you're in line to become a genuine and well-integrated person. Howard Thurman, the theologian philosopher, wrote, "There is something in every one of you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. It is the only true guide you will ever have. And if you cannot hear it, you will live all your life and spend all your days on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls." So Thurman is telling us to return to the maxims we've heard so often. Know thyself, to thine own self be true. Knowing all the while that figuring out who thyself is the essence of our entire life journey. One more note about having troubles and how we should respond to them. We often hear sentiments to the effect of, how can you party and have fun when the world is burning, when your family is suffering, when whatever else terrible exists in your world? Well, you should never feel guilty about experiencing joy at the same time that bad things are happening in life. Pleasure and joy and gaiety and frivolity in the face of danger, repression, and threats. These are wonderful survival mechanisms. And most forms of play, even, are ways of approaching new possibilities and working into adaptation. To speak the language of my generation, I'll quote Mr. Neil Young. Don't let it bring you down. It's only castles burning. Find someone who's turning, and you will come around. Be resilient in the face of adversity, even when the world seems to fall apart. Don't get all discouraged by negative events. It's far wiser instead to look to someone with a new perspective and a more hopeful orientation. Always hold hope. Always look for hope, and do so in a spirit of love and connection. Amen. Blessed be. And now we will join in singing something. I never remember. Where are we, Jean?
1008.
1008, when your heart is